Hi everybody, Rob here in Bakersfield on the back patio, and welcome to this week's Throwback Thursday. This will be part two of One Armed Angry Mob, One Officer. Last week we left off with me disarming the crowd and sending everybody home. This week won't be as exciting and dangerous as that, but it'll give you a little insight on some of the BS that went on back in those days. So, it's still Saturday. After I finished sending everybody home, I went to the house to take the burglary report. And while I'm there taking the report, get my evidence kit out, and I'm taking fingerprints off the kitchen window and went around talking to the neighbors to get witness statements. I had gathered a fairly large crowd of neighbors. And they were all wondering what was taking so long and what was I doing. Because as they were stating, and they called in, the officers came out, and some of the officers didn't even take reports. The officers that did take reports didn't bother to lift fingerprints, didn't bother to get witness statements, and they only spent like 10-15 minutes there and were gone. I was there for about an hour doing my investigation. So I got the names of the people who said that they had also been burglarized and no reports had been filed, and I got the names of the people who said that they had filed reports but the officers didn't collect fingerprints or anything, and I told those two people I'd come over to their house as soon as I was done there and check and see if there was any evidence to collect. So I went over there, and sure enough, there's fingerprints on the windows, so I lifted those fingerprints for that case. Told them I would include that as an officer's supplemental report. And I told all the people that I would get back in and check the crime report book and find out what was going on, see if any reports had been filed or not, and asked them all to meet me back there at that house the next day, Sunday, around 9:30. And I'd just take my food break at that time and talk with everybody, basically have kind of like a neighborhood meeting. So I get back into the station at the end of watch, and I go check the crime book, and sure enough, there's some of the people, there's not even any crime report filed on them. Some of them, instead of being filed as felony burglaries, were filed as misdemeanor petty thefts, and no evidence had been collected. So I get copies of all those reports, so I'll have them with me the next day when I meet the people. And I go in to get my reports for the day signed by the sergeant, and he asked me about, well, what's this supplemental officer's investigation report with the fingerprints? So I explained to him, well, when I was out there taking my report, the person I was talking to as a witness for my report said that they'd also been burglarized and that the officer never looked for fingerprints on their case and what was going on. So I checked, and sure enough, there were prints, and I lifted them, and I want to include them in with the report. Problem is, that officer filed a petty theft crime report, not a burglary report. Now, you're wondering, well, what the hell's up with that? And here's what the deal was. The city had told the police department that they wanted to cut down their crime stats that they had to file with the FBI for national crime reporting to make San Diego look like it was a better city than it actually was. So they told us that if you have a residential burglary and you don't have any witness statements, and you don't have any evidence, no sign of forced entry, to just put it through as a petty theft instead of a felony burglary. They also said that if you have felony burglaries of vehicles, put those all through as petty theft or grand theft, depending on the value of stuff stolen. Now, the problem with doing that is that if you do catch a suspect, then you can only charge him with misdemeanors instead of felonies. So, needless to say, the officer was going to get questioned about why he didn't find those fingerprints, but that was going to piss him off. He was going to be pissed at me, but that's his problem, not mine. So let's go to the next day, Sunday. I get out to work. I take care of all the stuff I had to take care of in the first few hours of my shift. 9:30 rolls around, I go back over to the house from the victim of the day before with all the reports and everything, and I got about 24 people standing there. Some of them had filed reports, some of their reports were put through as petty thefts, and some of them had called in to file complaints, and nobody had taken reports. So I spent my whole lunch hour going around and doing reports and collecting evidence. that should have been done by other officers during other shifts. And there was still a lot that I didn't get to in that time, so I told the people, I got all their names and addresses. I told them that I would be back during the day in between all my radio calls that I had to handle. And that's what I did. I spent the rest of the day in between each radio call going back to the neighborhood, redoing reports, sloppy reports that other officers had done, taking additional officers' investigations and lifting fingerprints and collecting witness statements. And by the end of the day of doing all this, I had come across one lady who had been burglarized. Her case had been put through as a petty theft. And her daughter had witnessed the whole thing, knew who the kid was. As it turned out, it was a teenager who was doing all this. She knew him, knew where he lived, knew his name. So with the permission of her mom and her daughter and I went over, and she pointed out the kid's house and everything. Then I took them back home, and I went over to knock on the door, but nobody would answer the door. Well, my end of shift came, so I go back and get my reports signed by the sergeant, and I've got a stack of about, if I remember correctly, I think it was about a dozen reports. Burglary reports with fingerprints and witness statements, additional officers' investigation reports to go along with the petty theft reports. And I have to explain to the sergeant the whole situation, what's going on. Well, he's, I don't know, kind of pissed, because now all those officers that filed petty theft cases that should have been felony burglary cases, he's going to have to talk to all of them. There might be some shit rolling down the hill from that. That's not my problem. But they get them all signed up and everything. And since I had discovered the series burglary going on in the neighborhood and discovered who the suspect was, he had me go and talk to the detective sergeant. So I went and I told the detective sergeant what I had, laid it all out to him, showed him all the crime reports, all the evidence, witness statements, everything else, told him who the suspect was. So Monday morning, they were planning to go out and knock on the door and arrest the kid. Now, they also had passed on the information on to a female officer who took over on second watch. She was supposed to go by throughout the day and check the house and see if the suspect was home and arrest him. But she claims that he never came home. That might be true, I don't know. So anyways, Monday morning rolls around. I'm not in working on Monday. I have Monday off. And what happens on Monday is going to be in part 3. So I don't want to make these too long. So in this series, what you got here is a little inside information as to what happens with the city ordering the police department to change crime report stats to make the city look better in the national news than what it really is. Besides burglary things, they also changed sexual assault cases. If we had, instead of putting through a case as an attempted rape, if it hadn't gotten past a certain point, we were ordered to put those cases through as an assault and battery rather than an attempted rape. Big problem with that is when you finally find the serial rapist, then you don't get to charge him with all those felonies. So, to me, that was a bunch of bullshit. It really pissed me off that the city and the department does that, and I'm sure they still do that kind of crap today. But that's the story for this week. I know it's not as exciting as disarming an angry armed crowd, and but I hope you find it interesting. So I'll see y'all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.